So today we're going to be talking a little bit, going to be kind of a casual session. We're going to talk about good enough modeling and how that's important. I'm going to go into a little bit about the WhereScape Pebble syntax. And after that, I'd actually just like to open it up and talk about any questions or uh, issues that anyone might be facing either in WhereScape or in Data Vault in general. Right, InfoVia, our mission, bringing peace of mind to growing organizations through simplified and secure data management. So we do offer both consulting to help with your modeling, and we also offer a security package. Tim normally does that spiel, so Tim, sorry if I messed that up.
Go for it. That's fine.
All right, so good enough modeling. The idea of this title kind of underplays it, but we can also think about it in terms of agile, right? Like minimum viable product type modeling. And the reason why this is really important, and it's an issue a lot of organizations face, is because we all try to be so good about our data that we spend a lot of time curating it and not enough time or too much time curating it. And we're not in close enough communication with our stakeholders. Now, the example here I thought was kind of funny. A stakeholder comes to you and they need fruit. They need red fruit. They need grapefruit. So you get them grapefruit and you go out and you find this grapefruit, right? You got to go pull it because you don't have it in stock. That's fine. You wash it, you dry it, you trim it, you slice it, you present it to them. And they look at it and it's not what they wanted. They wanted grapes. And this, well, kind of exaggerated, is what we face a lot of times with our models. When we start Data Vault or we start a model or anything we're doing involving modeling and getting data to our users, and if you're an architect, it's probably not an end user, right? You're not probably not putting this on a dashboard somewhere. This is probably getting them data so they can use their tool, Power BI, Sisense, Tableau, whatever, to present that data to the users. So instead of taking all this time like we did to curate the data, to make sure it's very pretty, to make sure you rename all the column names, what we should be looking at is iterating very quickly and presenting them even just the raw data. If we came up to that stakeholder, held out a whole grapefruit, even a dirty one, and said, "This," and they said no, we have just saved ourselves and that stakeholder a lot of time. And this matters. There's three sections to this. The first one is that getting the data is much faster when you're not as concerned about the data looking perfect and you can just run out and grab it. And tools like WhereScape let you do this very, very quickly. So you can throw together you can go to a source, pull it in, put in a little star schema and generate that for them as the raw data. And they can quickly assess that and figure out if it meets their needs. So it's quick for you, and the return for them is quite fast. In 10 years ago or so, this was a much slower process. They would request the data, you go get the data, you cut back to them in a month and say, "Here's your data," and they'd say, "Great," or "not," as was often the case. Now, with the tools we have available, we can iterate much faster, and it's important to take advantage of that. We can turn around, give them exactly what they're looking for. They're really happy to get it fast. And even if the data isn't exactly where they want it to be, by looking at that raw data, which they'll likely be familiar with, right? Because that's the data they work with in their position every day, they can identify any issues with the data or any changes that need to be made before they actually use it. So less curation of the data is helping both you and your stakeholder because your turnaround is faster and there's more room for manipulating the data afterwards, which is the last component of this. If you give a stakeholder basically raw data, you have not stripped out any valuable information. Now, I'm not going to get in time. It matters, of course, if they need a historical view or if they just want a current view. Those are factors. But for the most part, you don't want to be spending any time merging middle, last, and first name into a single column. If they want that done, let them handle it. So Dan Lindstedt, who does Data Vault, talks about self-service BI, and I found that to be very true. If you can give one of your report writers or one of your analysts the raw data just munged to the minimal extent they need it handled, they have a lot more freedom to manipulate that any way they want. And they don't have to come back to you to have that manipulation done. They don't need to say, "Hey, I actually want a comma, last name, comma, first name." It's just, here's your data. You have the tool, go for it. So again, with the automation on your side, you can get the data very quickly. And with the tool they have on their side, they have the power to make those changes so long as you give them the freedom and the data they need. Let's talk a little bit about WhereScape now. So like I was saying, got to be fast, got to go fast. WhereScape 3D and not the next slide. All right, so automation tools. These are getting better and better. WhereScape is certainly one of the most mature on the market right now. And we can see right here, this is WhereScape 3D. So this is their top-down product. The idea is you find what you want and you tell the automation engine how you want it to look, and it generates that for you. And it's pretty good at what it does. So here we see that I have connected to a data source, good old worldwide importers. And this is the model that it pulls in. And it's huge, and it's a ton of tables, and it's, oops, here we go. And it's more than we need. That's fine. Using this tool, we can cut it down to the parts that are important to us, to whatever the stakeholder needs. So it gives us breakdown of, it's our ERD diagram, basically. It lets us know what's connecting to what and how. We can break that down even further and identify the individual components that are important to us. And then we take that, now that we've reviewed the model, we've pulled in any or identified any data we don't have, and we can actually start building our data vault model. So I'm not going to go too much into the data vault modeling process itself, but you can see here that we have some tables represented. Let me zoom in a bit on that. We have a customer's entity and various attributes. Here's some more information about the customers and how they link to orders and orders here. And once we put this into the automation tool, it generates a tidy little model for us. It generates our load tables, and it generates our stage tables. Now, WhereScape 3D is particularly good at this. It's really nice to have this top-down approach, but even using WhereScape Red or using a different automation tool, you can very quickly generate models using the raw data. So when we talk about good enough modeling, a lot of times we are focused on the idea of quick turnaround and giving them the raw data, because there's nothing wrong with the raw data. There are conversations that can happen about maybe some extra crunch you want to put into the database because it's too hard on your dashboard program, and that's fine. But a lot of times that raw data, that turnaround right away is going to move you along much faster, and it's going to make your stakeholders a lot happier. So with WhereScape 3D, you pull it in, you tell it what you want done, it generates the models for you, and you have it. And the same is true with a lot of other automation tools. So that is the brief on good enough modeling. Get there, get them the data, some form of data, preferably raw. Don't worry about curating it too much, and just talk to them. It keeps the communication going. The fast turnaround means that it's going to be more on their minds. There's no awkward back and forth and a lot of wasted time. Any questions on that? All right. That was the good enough data modeling. Now I want to talk a little bit more. This is going to be WhereScape specific, obviously, about Pebble. Now, this is something I threw in because a lot of clients have recently been requesting we talk a little more about the Pebble template syntax used in WhereScape 3D. Just like any templating language, it lets us leverage SQL a little better. We can do some loops. We can set some variables. It's a nice tool, and it's a really good way to modify your specific environment. If you get really involved in any automation tool, you're going to find that the vanilla automation isn't a fit-all situation. You're going to want to make changes. You might want record tracking satellites. You might handle your business keys a little differently than anyone. And Pebble for WhereScape is their solution for that. So let's talk a little bit about Pebble. It is not a standard templating language. It is not Jinja. It is not Handlebars. It's a little older, but it's still very functional. The best way I've found to practice with this templating language is to actually go into WhereScape 3D, and there's an environment that basically lets you test it out. So if you go into the model conversion rules and you pull up anything that where you're defining a template. So I'll go to 3D in a minute to show this. You can select an entity here, like a table, and actually run whatever Pebble syntax you have against that entity. So you can try it out without having to go through the actual automation and seeing if it failed or not. You can try it right then. And even gets more detailed because if you choose an entity, say customer in this case, you can break it down and select specific source sets or relationships or attributes. And this is a very convenient tool, especially when you're creating your own Pebble syntax. Let me open up 3D here. Right. Let's go test this out. So tools, let me know if this is too small for you guys. Hopefully it's all right. I'm going to go to manage model conversion rules. Let's see, discovery, there we go. And all right, so we're in the rules now. I'm just finding any rule that has the option to define a template. I'm going to paste in my play code here. All right, so this is Pebble. And I am going to select an entity. We're going to use that customer table. All right, and we can immediately see the results of this code here. So I'm going to comment out some stuff at the beginning. And we'll just kind of go through this. It's on. We'll comment it out. So we'll go through this line by line and talk a little bit about how Pebble works. Now, this is an introduction I wouldn't have minded having when I first started using Pebble. First thing, curly brackets, know them, love them. That is how you signify when you want to use some code. You'll notice this little dash after the curly brackets, and that is a trim, basically. If you do not include the trim, it brings white space over. Refresh this now. So it can bring over spaces or sometimes line breaks that you don't want. So usually, unless you want the space, I always suggest including the dash. So curly brace, bracket, dash is going to be how you set up your code. And you can see here, I'm setting variables. I have var1 and var2, and that's just straight text. And then we have a connection. And that
Can you
actually,
increase that, Christopher? Can you
sorry?
can you zoom in a little bit on that and see if you can? People were asking if you could zoom in a bit.
Yes. Let me increase the size of my monitor here. I'm going to stop sharing 1 sec.
Sure. Or you could just share the content as well if you want directly.
Let's see.
And sometimes it's a little bit hard to see the specifics, so we'll make the content a little bit bigger there.
All right, here I'm going to reshare, and hopefully this will be better. You know, I'll take myself off the video. That'll help too. All right, how's that, everyone?
That's much better. Thank you.
That's awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All right, great. Okay, so WhereScape does get a little choppy at 300%, but we will keep running with this, and I think it'll be fine. All right, there we go. Just selected that again and let's paste in my template. And here we go. All right. So curly bracket, %, dash. That's going to be your core. You can use this simple. So there's set. You can use set to set your variables. It does demand a value, but that's pretty useful actually because you can set it as something like this. So you know if you get to the end and it returns var1 empty, you've gone wrong somewhere. You can also set it to objects. So we have set connection here, and we're using a function, and this is one of the most helpful functions. It's closest connection. If you find yourself doing a lot of modification of your WhereScape environment, you're going to get to the point where you need to modify things based on the connection. Often this will be a BKCC or maybe a tracking satellite. So closest connection accepts both tables and columns and will return the connection. So variables accept text and objects. All right, and if you haven't gathered, you can comment things out with this little curly bracket followed by the pound sign. So that's variables. We see return values next. So return values are a little different. If you just want to type text in, and you do run into these instances, you can just type and you'll see line 7 comes out as line 1. No problem. It accepts that without a problem. BR, standard line break, so it doesn't all bundle up on itself. Delete this and show you how it can do that if you don't put that in there. Oh, except I have 2 spaces. So it didn't do it. So that's not here. We'll do this. Boop. Passive variable. So if you want to actually return a variable or an object as its text value, you use double curly brackets instead of the curly bracket % here. So let's see. You can see var1 empty is being returned because we're calling var1 right here. Pretty straightforward. Now here's where it gets a little interesting. So we have set connection to the closest connection for this table. And so here on line 12, I'm calling connection. And on line 3, it's returning what it has there. And it's all this stuff. And it's like, okay, that's not really helpful. But what we can do now is take this object and start looking at the properties there. So for instance, connection has a name, right? Makes sense. So if I go connection name, we can see whatever I named it, which is worldwide importers. And this can make automation very quick sometimes, because if you pull on the object and you know where you want to go with the object, you can return that value. So that's particularly helpful with connections, especially if you're reaching out to the documentation tab. But almost anything you do, you're going to need to be traversing the object. So let's talk about traversing the objects. Line 16, table name is line 5. Customer. So that it's just that dot format. Table, so our object is table dot name. So I want to return the property name. Nothing new there. Something to keep in mind though is what object you default to matters. Right now I chose entity H customer, so I'm on a hub, I'm on an entity. So I can call table name and there's no confusion. If I went to source sets, oh no, you know what? That'll still be okay. If you use if you start at source sets or if you start at relationships, oh, you can't really see that. Sorry, I'm too zoomed in to demo this quite right. But if you start at a source set level, then you need to remember that when you're dealing with your objects, because you're dealing with the source set, not the entity. If you're dealing with the entity or the table, then you need to traverse down there. So let me show that here. So we can go to table.columns. Now, when we do this table.columns, columns is a mapping from table to the columns, and you actually have the columns entity or object, however you want to look at it at that point. So I can start at the table, I can move to the table columns, and then I can specify which column. Anytime you have an array or a list or more than one object, you can specify right in this variable which one you want to deal with this. Now we'll get to loops in a minute to show you how to cycle through all those. But if you know you're going to want the first one, which again is pretty often the case, you can just put bracket 0, and suddenly you're in the column space. So if I'm in the column space, I can call a specific column name. And in this case, that's HKH customer. And if I change it to 1, customer BK, change it to 2, DSS record source. So this is how you can very quickly traverse objects in WhereScape using Pebble. You can move from table to columns, back to source set, to name of the source set. So that's more traversing. We went to the table, column, source set name, got default source. And you can even go back and forth if you feel like it. So table, columns, source set, back to columns, back to table, back to name, and it'll do that all day long. This is pretty lightweight. Even if you have very large models, I haven't seen significant impact from even pretty complex Pebble templates. In the earlier versions of WhereScape, they did try to keep a little more in RAM to make it faster. So you had to break your model conversion rules apart. So if you did use WhereScape back then, maybe you remember that. But I think they've really optimized it lately, and I haven't had any situations where I've really had to break down even the more complex rules to make it manageable. All right, now the last thing in this little intro is loops. Of course, we need loops because sometimes we have a lot of things and we want to go through all of them or we want to match them. So there are a couple other kind of loops, but the main loops you're going to be using are the for loop, which is pretty straightforward. So we use curly bracket, percentage, dash, for, call, and we're naming a variable here, right? This doesn't have to be declared ahead of time. It is worth keeping in mind that it will not be available after the loop completes. This variable only exists in this name in the loop itself. So if you need whatever that variable is passed along, you need to pass that to a variable you've established outside of the loop. So if we're calling table columns, and we see here double curly bracket, so we're returning a value, and the value we're returning is call. Then I'm putting a break there. Just delete this stuff so we don't show that. And we see we have customer, customer BK, record source, load date, and create time. And then we have end for. Every loop you start needs to be ended in Pebble. So we have for, end for. Now, the other loop that's really helpful is a from loop. From is like a loop with a where clause, if you want to think about it like that. We say from table column, so similar to what we're doing above, as new variable, again, we're specifying a specific variable. But for that variable, we're saying the new variable name has to equal variable 2. You can see that by this equals equals sign. And if it does equal, or then I print new variable, and new variable is only going to be populated where it meets the condition that it matches var2, which is DSS create time. And so the only value we return is DSS create time, even though we are looping over every table column. If we do this, it's unreadable because we didn't put the BR in. There we go. Then there's no where condition and it just returns everything. And then of course we end it with an end from. All right, so that is a little intro to Pebble. If you have questions, please feel free to speak up. That should get you started. That's a little more than I started with when I started working with Pebble. And if you look through the model conversion rules, you'll see that WhereScape has done quite a bit with these, and you can crib off of what they've already done. WhereScape also provides some solutions they call field solutions, and those are usually much more complex and have some really interesting Pebble work done. Their record tracking satellite, for one, was very interesting, and Infovia actually took that on and did some changes to it and actually reproduced it using their similar logic. I think they've made some improvements to Pebble as time has gone on, because you see the old stuff has kind of a clunkier syntax, and this new stuff traverses objects, like I showed you, a lot more easily. So yeah, Pebble, useful, and it's the best way to extend your automation. It works both in 3D under the model conversion rules, it works in 3D under the templates, and it works in red under the templates as well. So if you're modifying your WhereScape automation, you need to be modifying with Pebble. All right. And that is the first 2/3 of this webinar. At this point, I wanted to open it up to questions either about what we've already discussed or just general Data Vault and WhereScape questions. Nothing is off the table. So anything anybody wants to chat about or an issue they've run into, let's do it.
Chris, this is John White.
Hey, John.
Hey, we're looking kind of to the future and wanting to build star schemas off of our data vault.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any experience using 3D to do that you could share with us to get us kick-started?
Sure. So 3D can do star schemas. I actually tend to reach for red myself when doing that, but if you're talking 3D specifically, yes, they do physicalized star schemas, I believe. There are differences in your platform. So if you're ending up on Snowflake, I believe they support virtualized star schemas in 3D. If you're ending up on SQL Server, they do not. I think that's only physical for WhereScape 3D. It's pretty friendly. I think red is almost equally friendly there, but I do see the advantage of going through 3D because it's less work and it's done the same way for everyone. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's here. Let me see if I can fight my. No, that's not a good idea. Okay, I'm not gonna.
Chris, but I was thinking we would come by, we'd go back to 3D, read from our business model as the base model, and then move forward to create the star schema. Is that a best practice to do it that way, or?
Yes, absolutely. So you would ingest your data vault as one of your sources in 3D, and then you'd have access to all those objects to build your star schema from. And if it's virtualized, then there's nothing, right? You don't need to worry about any load tables or the like. And if you do a physical one, just like always, it'll build you the physical load and stage tables. But re-ingesting your data vault into 3D is a great idea. There's a lot you can do from that. I don't usually do that to build specific business vault models, but I really like having it in 3D to reference and to profile. So yes, I would say that is definitely best practice.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris, this is Derek. I work with John. You've met me.
Yes. Hi, Derek.
We deal with very messy source systems, and they surprise us all the time with deleting records. Not like voiding a record or marking it as deleted, but just flat out deleting the records.
Mm-hmm.
We have some ideas on how to handle that. Triggers, obviously, maybe writing and maintaining our own deleted table. What thoughts do you have on that?
Okay, well, the first class solution, the best solution, of course, is if you can get some form of change data capture on the source system. That's best. That's great. I know that's not always possible, but if you can get that, then you can ingest that information into your data vault without any qualms, right? Like you can even add a deleted flag to your satellite straight from the raw vault, because that is from your source system. So that change data capture information on your source system counts as source data. It could go straight into your raw vault and save you a lot of trouble. If you do not have that option, then you need to start looking at managing the logic on your side. So that's, I believe, what you're starting to talk about. They're called record tracking satellites. And the idea there is you saw something on Monday and you recorded it, and it was business key 8805 and it has satellite data. And then come Wednesday, you do an ingestion again, and 8805 was missing. It doesn't tell you that it's missing. You just know that it's missing because when you did the load, it wasn't there. And the way to handle that is a special Data Vault object, if you're using Data Vault, called a record tracking satellite. And it's basically a business vault object that does a comparison between what you currently have in your data vault against what was just pulled in. So it would be an object that would automatically, it would be part of your update process. You do your load, and at the end, your record tracking satellite does a comparison between what you had and what you just pulled in and produces a result. If it was deleted, it's flagged as deleted. And then if it comes back later, of course, it'll do that comparison again, and it'll be a different change hash value because it will no longer be deleted, and it'll update. So you can see things even if they fade in and out of your system for some reason, and it will track that. Now 3D, I think I talked about this ever so briefly. WhereScape does offer a field solution to provide those satellites. Infovia has a beefed up version that I think is better. It's built on using their work, so thanks to them for starting that. And by default, it will track every hub and link in your model that you generate. And it will create a record tracking satellite for those that will reference the stage table and compare it to your satellite data. So that is basically what you're left with if you can't get some form of change data capture. And it's important to know that a record has been deleted, which it often is.
So you're saying Infovia has written custom model conversions?
Yes.
To do that?
Yeah, if
and
you go to
that creates the objects in red and the code as well, like the store procedure code that would do the compare.
Yes, yeah, it creates it. It's a 3D package actually, so it does get to red eventually because you export from 3D to red.
Yeah.
But it's built for use in 3D. And yeah, we provide that. It's available free on our website. The implementation's a little complicated, but not too bad if you're familiar with Pebble. And it, like I said, it does it on every hub and link. There are some caveats if your model's a little complicated and it might require a manual step or two, but if your model's pretty straightforward, it should just work out of the box.
So you're saying links, it does links as well?
Yes.
Because to us, if the hub via the satellite has been deleted, we don't really care if the links are there or not.
But what if you had a relationship between customer and organization? I don't know. And that relationship is gone. They both exist independently. The organization hasn't gone anywhere and your customer hasn't gone anywhere, but that link, that relationship between the two has ended, is no longer current in your system.
Yeah, that is a valid
Sometimes
case.
You need to represent that.
Yeah, that is a valid case. We haven't encountered that one yet, but that is valid.
Yeah. So record tracking satellites are a bear. They're the least fun way to handle that. Again, CDC, if you can get change data capture, they're going, that's great. So if you know a system is going to need record tracking satellites, we generally suggest you just implement it across all of them and ignore them if you don't need them. That way you don't need to go back and handcraft anything after.
Yeah, our like I said, our data is so bad that I almost don't trust anything I get from the source, and that this record tracking satellite would be great to just do on everything, and then there's no surprises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always amazing what your database is actually up to when you really get into modeling and digging out what's in there. So yeah, I would recommend it. It sounds like that is a good fit for your scenario. And the only catch with that is you got to be careful with your incremental loads, right? If you're doing an incremental load, only pulling, either you have a high water mark or you only pull in the last 7 days or something, you cannot do a complete comparison because you're not working with 2 complete sets of data. So
Yeah.
then
We did some custom code, Chris, and I know exactly what you're saying, right? Because if you're looking at like a 7-day look back, your previous day has, well, sort of the 8th day in there. And you can't compare to that 8th day.
Right. Right. So then you need to have either 2 different load patterns for your RTS satellites, or you just don't worry about a full and you make sure that your RTS satellite knows to only go 7 days back.
Yeah.
So Chris, how do you use that? So I now have a satellite that says this no longer exists. But I still have my hub CBC there. How do you then, do you just say, hey, if it exists in this, I mean, how do you use that in your views to expose your core business concept in your business vault?
So assuming you're only worried about the current view, then you do the same kind of group and max date select that you would against a satellite. You say, for this business key, and for the last record I had for this business key, what is its value? And if the value is deleted, then you use that to filter out that business key. And if it's there, you let it pass.
Okay, so this what did you call it again? It's what satellite is it? It's a
record tracking satellite.
Record tracking satellite. So it's tracking the hub record or the satellite?
It's tracking the hub. It's tracking your business.
Okay, so it's
keys.
tracking the hub. So basically, as soon as you look in that satellite, hey, if I'm deleted, then you just exclude it. Okay, so do you guys provide updates to the templates that create the current views and pit views?
You know, we
do that?
don't, but we certainly could. We've manually done that. The code isn't too bad to do it, but yeah, we can. That's something I could definitely look into making generally available. But it is just a join to that satellite, that record tracking satellite. So it's not too big of a jump to do yourself. But yeah, that's a great question, and I don't see any reason why we can't provide that as well.
Yeah, it sounds like if we had that, we would have a 3D automated solution there that would be very attractive to us. What we're trying to do is little modifying in red of the raw vault, and raw vault for us also includes current and pit views.
Yeah, and the current and pit views will generate on your record tracking satellite as well. So there's a little extra convenience there.
Yeah. Nice. I like that.
What about the scenario where the business key changes? I know it sounds terrible, but the business key changes. It's the same thing, but
right.
Of course it's you know, you have an old hub and a new hub.
Yeah, no, I don't feel like that's terrible because the map is not the territory. The same object you're trying to reference can be referred to different ways, and you deal with that even between source systems. So in that case, you do want your same as link, which is going to be basically a link pointing to and from the same hub, and you can use it to track that way. You need some form of business logic for that to know how one became the other and if one is still the other and all those details. But then it's just basically a hierarchical link saying John Smith with no E is the same as John Smith with an E. And whenever you see John Smith, it is actually without an E, it is actually John Smith with an E. And you will probably want a record tracking satellite on that as well if, again, you don't have the CDC data to know what the most current resolution for any given business key is.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, Chris, on the same as links, is that manual? Do you typically have to manage that manually in red, or is there some mechanism in 3D to auto generate them?
I guess you could auto-generate the link entity itself in 3D, but the caveat there, right, is each same as link is going to have a different set of business logic to determine what makes it the same. Sometimes it's as simple as hitting a table. And in that case, yes, definitely 3D can handle it, no problem. But it's usually going to be a bit of custom logic, and it's going to be different each time. So I treat 3D like my blunt tool. When I want to do a lot of things to a lot of objects, that's what I go to 3D for. When I want to make fine-tuned things or implement specific business rules, I go to Red. So I'd say you can do it in 3D, especially if your source is very straightforward. Maybe you've built a view, right? That'd be a great way to do it. If you maintain a view that has all the business logic you need to identify which business key should resolve to which business key, and it's just a big view that does that for you, that'd be easy to use in 3D.
Okay, thank you. I think we're hogging the time. I'll be quiet for a few minutes.
No, that's great. What was that situation where you ask a question and someone else who was not going to ask the question gets something of an answer that they wanted? And if people don't ask questions, I'll just start talking about BKCCs. Who knows what else?
There you go.
Okay, I guess no one's got a question. I got another question for you.
All right.
So our core business concepts are made up of pretty diverse source systems.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had to come up with a pretty elaborate scheme to manage that. Hopefully as highly automated as possible. We're starting to review and kind of look at a bag of keys approach in the CBCs to simplify, unifying across these different source systems. I noticed 3D doesn't have anything to support that type of construct. Do you know if they're going to have anything available to support a bag of keys with a core business concept?
That is not on their roadmap as far as I know. I have implemented that for customers in the past. It's not too bad. So I assume your issue is like you'll have one customer with the business key that is just a single business key, and you have another customer that's like 3 different compound, or it's a compound business key, and those aren't lining up nicely in your customer hub.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. A hardcore.
We're finding we have a lot of problems if we do a superset where the values are null and we get over to implement into red, the standard template fails because it doesn't check for nulls in the keys. And so we're really trying to avoid, I mean, it's just a best practice is not to allow nulls in your keys. So to do that, we really have to go to something like a bag of keys. And we're really just trying to see if there's any roadmap to actually support that. If not, we would have to build those ourselves. We're really, Pebble's not the language of choice that I'd want to get into and develop in. We have done it. I mean, Derek's actually became, he's pretty proficient in Pebble. I give him a lot of credit for that. He's jumped in and learned that, but it's not something that I really desire to go do. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see, WhereScape support bag of keys in their roadmap.
Well, you can definitely issue that their way. They do respond to comments. I believe Dan Lindstedt does not have that as an official Data Vault 2.0 standard, and they tend to prioritize things that are officially Data Vault 2.0 standard. I will say the implementation in 3D, if you want to do it yourself, and I know, like we talked about, Pebble's not super fun, but it is not terrible to do. It's basically a concatenation of your values into a single business key value, and you take any of the values that were concatenated and you put those in their own satellite. And you can utilize WhereScape's there are custom attribute types to handle that. So you give a special custom attribute type of bag of keys, and you also mark it a business key, and you do have to make some changes to the model conversion rules, but you can get that working. I do not believe I've heard anything from WhereScape about implementing that. And
Yeah, the
even,
last word I heard is they're not ever going to do it.
yeah, like I'm running through the automation tools I'm aware of in my head, and I can't think of one that does that offhand.
Yeah.
So that might have to be a custom solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Vipul. My 2 cents on this. So Pebble is not very hard. So basically, I customized the model conversions in Red and 3D. It was not that hard. It just took me about a week to basically follow the syntax and do it. I don't say I became an expert on Pebble, but I could do what I wanted to do.
Nice.
Yeah. Another tip for when you're working with Pebble is to try to leave the WhereScape automation process alone and not adjust their rules if possible. Try to add your rules in addition to theirs and not change the process if you can. That might help as well.
Firmly agree with that. We've really tried not to touch their stuff because we know if we do that we're now, the next upgrade, we're going to pay for it.
Another alternative to bag of keys is when you have that situation where your business keys are compound or not against single or different levels of compound, you can use a same as link to even that out in your business vault. It's still a little kludgy. Like, I totally see why you want to move to that. But once you get to the point where you have a hash of your business key, whether it be one or many, now you have the possibility of unioning that into one massive hub to play with instead of having to jump between hubs.
Yeah, Chris, I just had a thought. Maybe you can maybe I'll bounce this off of you. If we and I haven't had much luck with it. I think Derek's had some more luck than I have, but in 3D doing a transform and transforming all of your source columns that are coming in into a concatenated column. And then just slap all those source columns into their separate satellite. That seems like, if I just haven't had a lot of luck with that transforming data in 3D at the data vault design level. Does that seem like a reasonable approach to try to do?
Yes, I would suggest holding off on actually applying the transform until your load in stage or red. Or the red export model. If you do it anytime before then, like in Data Vault Design, I prefer to do everything in there, right? If I can do it in Data Vault Design, I am going to do it in Data Vault Design, and if I can't, I might do it in red. But in this case, if you know what your conversion rules or your transformation is going to be, and you can add it as part of your conversion to a load and stage model or a red export model, then that is the best place I've found to do transformations. Your objects are not going to be splitting into even more objects at that point. So there's more fine-grained control over both the entity or tables at that point and the transformations.
I can't envision how that would work. I apologize, Chris. I'm gonna have to think about that because at the design level, I need to define my business key. So are you saying add a column at your design level, but don't do any transforms into it until later?
Yes. And then you would need logic that identifies all your business keys and does a concatenation into that column, which you can auto-generate if you want to. And it would handle that later on because you still know what your business keys are at the stage and load point, right? And that's really all you need to do that concatenation. You need to know what your business keys are.
Yeah, are we able to say, yeah, I mean, here's kind of where we're at, Chris, is we really have been able to do everything at the design level at this point.
Mhm.
So right now, I think we have 6 or 7 models. They come in, they're push key all the way through from data vault design all the way to red. We're not making any modifications at any of the other model conversion levels. And we've done that purposely because we wanted turnkey, quick execution.
Mhm.
And we're still finding, once we get to red, we have to do some modifications, right? And we're keeping the business rules. I mean, Derek's got a great scheme to do that, to keep track of our business rules there. So if we had are you thinking that you would apply a model conversion at the load and stage model conversion and say, hey, here's how I want you to populate this column?
Yes, absolutely. I would not want to do that by hand either. But by including it as part of the steps that happen as part of your load and stage process, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to worry about it forgetting to be implemented. It's just part of your default transition to the load and stage model.
So would you have to have that model conversion for each CBC and
No.
each different source system that came in for that CBC?
No, you would set it up to look at your hubs because so the parameters you set when you're setting the model conversion rules, you can specify, hey, look at hubs, look at them by business key, look at them by source set, and act appropriately. Those are all things that Pebble can handle.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I know it's more complex than I intended it to be, but it's great to talk through that. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome.